I had always believed that rock bottom would come with sirens or screaming, maybe even a dramatic thunderstorm. But for me, it came in silence. Just a cold November wind slicing through broken window frames in a house I hadn't stepped foot in since I was 17. The place was exactly as I remembered, only worse. Faded wallpaper hung like wet paper towels, peeling at the corners. The old wooden floors groaned beneath my weight, every step a reminder of how abandoned everything had become, including me. I set my overstuffed duffel bag on a rusted metal chair that nearly gave way and walked over to the dented tin stove in the corner. A few logs had been stacked beside it, probably the last thing my grandfather touched before he passed away 4 years ago. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered, crouching down to light a match with trembling fingers. The flame caught a crumpled newspaper and slowly reached the kindling. I exhaled as warmth, faint but real, started to spread. That night, I talked to the dead more than the living. Because, honestly, I had no one else. Just 2 weeks ago, I was engaged to the man of my dreams. Victor Langston. CO. Charismatic. Powerful. The kind of man who could silence a room just by walking into it. The kind of man who had made me believe I was special. And now here I was pregnant, unemployed, and homeless, curled up beside a fire in my dead grandfather's decaying house in the middle of Flint Hills, Kansas. Some fairy tale. My hands were still shaking when I pulled the sleeves of my coat over my fingers and sat cross-legged near the stove. Tears welled up, but I refused to let them fall at first. I stared into the small dancing flames until they blurred, until the sobs came anyway, racking my chest and clawing at my throat. I didn't cry quietly. I cried like something had been ripped out of me, because something had. I cried until I had nothing left, until the fire crackled loud against the silence. Then I sat there, empty, waiting for the numbness to take over. It was so cold that even inside I could see my breath. The lights didn't work. I checked every switch. I tried the breaker box. Nothing. So I lit a candle I found in a drawer, pulled out a half-eaten sandwich from my bag, bought with the last $10 I had, and chewed without tasting. My stomach wasn't hungry, but I ate because I needed to survive. The shadows crept longer against the walls, and I couldn't shake the memory of just days ago, sitting in a fine dining restaurant in Topeka, sipping champagne while flipping through wedding catalogs with Victor, laughing, blushing when he kissed my hand across the table. I slept in my old childhood bedroom that night, fully clothed, curled up on top of a dust-covered mattress, too exhausted to change the sheets. Every creak of the wind outside felt like something closing in. I stared at the cracked ceiling until my eyes finally shut, but sleep didn't bring peace. Only memories, loud, vivid, painfully clear. The first time Victor called me his girl. The moment he slid a diamond ring onto my finger in front of the company's Christmas tree. The day I told him I was pregnant, and for a brief moment saw real joy flash across his face. All of it felt fake now. I used to think people only lost everything after making huge mistakes, but I hadn't made any. I was loyal, quiet, obedient, maybe too obedient. I'd built my entire life around his. I'd let him shape me into someone he could show off. And when he didn't want me anymore, he erased me like a typo on a screen. My name is Olivia Reed, and this is the story of how I lost everything. But it's also the story of how I found something far more important. Myself. I met Victor Langston on a Tuesday morning, the kind that smells like burnt coffee and new beginnings. I'd answered a job posting for an executive assistant position at a high-rise construction firm in downtown Topeka. I wore my one and only blazer, a thrift store gray thing with sleeves a little too long, and clutched my resume like a lifeline. I knew I wasn't qualified. No prior experience. No connections. Just a degree in art history, a student loan statement longer than a CVS receipt, and a desperate need for stability. There were 3 other women in the waiting room, all older, better dressed, and talking about their experience with scheduling software and project budgets. I wanted to run, but I stayed because I didn't have anywhere else to go. When Victor walked in, everything stopped. He wasn't just handsome, he was magnetic. Perfectly tailored suit, controlled confidence, not a hair out of place. He looked right past the other candidates and stopped at me. "You must be Olivia," he said. His voice was calm, smooth, as if we'd met before. I nodded, unable to find my voice. The interview was short. I fumbled through most of it, stammering over questions I hadn't prepared for. But Victor didn't seem to mind. He smiled in a way that made you feel like the sun was rising just for you. And by the next morning, I got the call. "You start tomorrow." I thought I'd imagined it. But no, I was hired. No trial period, no second interview. Just like that, I was Victor Langston's personal assistant. He started small, compliments on my neat handwriting, casual chats in the hallway, a warm coffee left on my desk before I arrived. Within weeks, he was giving me rides home, telling me I had an old soul, that I was refreshing compared to the usual types. I soaked it up like sunlight on a starving flower. No one had ever looked at me like that, like I mattered. I fell hard, not all at once, but in quiet moments after a long meeting when he'd touch my shoulder and say good job with real warmth in his eyes, or the day he fixed the strap on my purse and said, "You really should let someone take care of you." One night, after the company holiday party, he offered to drive me home. The air was cold, and the streets were glowing from holiday lights. He played soft jazz in the car and asked if I wanted to stop by his place for a drink. I said yes. I don't even remember what we talked about. I just remember the way he looked at me right before he kissed me, like I was something fragile and beautiful he didn't want to break. We slept together that night, and the morning after, he kissed my forehead and whispered, "I knew from the moment I saw you, you weren't like the others." From that moment on, I belonged to him. He moved me into a small but fully furnished apartment close to his own. Bought me clothes I never could have afforded. Lingerie that still had tags on them. Gold earrings. Spa gift cards. A whole new life wrapped in ribbon. I told myself this was love. That maybe, just maybe, I was finally getting my turn. Victor didn't like my old apartment, the one-bedroom shoebox with water stains and noisy neighbors. "You're not living like that anymore," he said. "I'll set you up with something decent. You deserve it." He meant it, or at least he convinced me he did. Sometimes we'd go out together to fundraisers, gallery openings, even one weekend getaway to the Gulf. He made sure I dressed the part. "My girl should turn heads," he'd whisper as he zipped up a new dress on me. I laughed then, flattered. I didn't see the control under the charm. He never let me drive when we were together. He always held the check. I never met any of his friends. Just his business associates, the polished kind who spoke in vague compliments and subtle judgment. But I didn't care, because every time he looked at me, I felt chosen. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. I thought it would be the end of everything. But instead, Victor smiled. "Well," he said, "my parents have been nagging about grandchildren. Guess you made that decision easy." I was stunned. He wasn't angry. In fact, he seemed pleased. "We'll go see them next weekend," he added. "Just don't talk too much about your past, all right? We'll keep it classy. No need to mention your hometown." He made it sound like he was protecting me. And just like that, he folded my life into his. I didn't know it then, but the ring he put on my finger weeks later wasn't a promise. It was a warning I didn't hear. It happened just a week before the wedding. One moment, I was standing barefoot in the kitchen, toasting a bagel and humming to some Nora Jones on the radio. The next, Victor was bursting through the front door, slamming it behind him like a hurricane in a three-piece suit. He didn't say hello, didn't look at me, just marched across the apartment with clenched fists and rage radiating off him like heat. I stood frozen by the counter. "Victor? What's wrong?" He turned slowly. His eyes, once warm and familiar, were now ice. "Don't," he snapped. "Don't pretend you don't know." I blinked. "Know what?" His face twisted into something unfamiliar, something cruel. You think I'm stupid? That I wouldn't find out? Jesus, Olivia, you're carrying someone else's kid and you still expect me to marry you. The world spun. I don't understand. My voice barely made it out. What are you talking about? This is your child. You know that. He laughed. Not a real laugh, but the bitter kind that comes out of someone who's already made up their mind. You think just because you played the shy little girl card, I wouldn't notice you sneaking around. I haven't, I whispered, stunned. I haven't done anything. But he wasn't listening, or maybe he never had. Victor stormed into the bedroom, yanked open the closet, and started ripping clothes off the hangers. What are you doing? I cried. He tossed a suitcase onto the bed and barked. Pack your things. You've got 30 minutes. Victor, please, this is a mistake. You're angry, I get it, but let's talk. There's nothing to talk about, he growled. You played me. Used me. Well, it ends now. I stood there, helpless, as he rifled through my drawers, throwing bras, sweaters, and memories onto the floor. His movements were sharp, surgical, as if he'd rehearsed this. I tried to grab my laptop, anything that was mine, but he snatched it from my hands. That's company property. No, it's not, I snapped, louder than I'd ever spoken to him. I bought it with my own money, before we even— You want to argue over a laptop now, he sneered. Fine, keep it, but the rest. He gestured to the jewelry, the designer coats, the handbags. Those were gifts, and gifts can be taken back. I could barely breathe. My chest was tight, my hands shaking. I thought of the baby growing inside me and felt like collapsing. Victor, please, I begged. You don't have to do this. At least, let's go to the doctor. We can confirm. He stepped forward and hissed. I don't care. I don't care who the father is. It's not my problem anymore. You can go trap someone else. Tears burned in my eyes. How can you say that? You said we were family. He snorted. That was before I realized you're just another gold digger with a sob story. I backed away as if slapped. He walked to the door and opened it wide. You can take the clothes you're wearing and whatever fits in that bag. The rest stays. I was silent, numb. I packed jeans, a hoodie, some underwear, my prenatal vitamins. I left behind the dress I picked out for our engagement photos. The heels, he said, made me look powerful. The silk nightgown he bought on our trip to Santa Barbara. Everything that had made me feel like I belonged in his world. As I zipped my duffel bag, he tossed my employee badge onto the table. You're terminated, effective today. I'd advise against filing a complaint. You're firing me too? In this company, he said coolly, I can do whatever I want. And if you raise a fuss, I'll make sure every recruiter in the state knows what you really are. When I didn't move fast enough, he made a call. 2 men showed up minutes later, broad-shouldered, expressionless, and clearly hired for intimidation. You'll escort her out, Victor instructed, barely looking at me. She's no longer welcome on this property. The guard stood there waiting. I held onto my bag like it was my last piece of dignity. As I stepped toward the door, Victor held out his hand. Ring. I stared at him. He wiggled his fingers. Now. I slid the engagement ring off my swollen finger. It caught for a moment, as if reluctant to leave. I dropped it in his palm without a word. He didn't even look at it. The guards led me out. Down the hallway, past the marble foyer I once thought was mine too. One opened the door of a black SUV waiting outside. He said to drop you off wherever you want. I didn't say a word. I didn't have the strength. The car pulled away. The city passed me by in a blur. And for the first time in my life, I had nowhere to go. I didn't cry in the car. Not once. Not when they dropped me 2 blocks from Katie's apartment in the freezing wind. Not when I dragged my duffel bag up 3 flights of stairs with numb fingers and a burning throat. I held it together like someone watching her own life through a glass window. Disconnected, already halfway gone. Katie was the only person I could think of. We hadn't talked in months, maybe longer, but she was still saved in my phone under ride or die. She opened the door in flannel pajamas, holding a mug of wine and blinking like she wasn't sure if she was dreaming. "Olivia," she said, confused. Then she saw the bag, my face, the look in my eyes. "Oh, God," she whispered. "What happened?" I didn't answer. I just stood there. A silence so raw hung between us. It said everything. She let me in. Her apartment was small, cluttered, warm. We sat at her kitchen table under dim lighting. She poured me tea while I stared at my reflection in the window, shocked at how hollow I looked. "You can stay here," she said, slowly, carefully. "Just for a bit. I'm about to sublet this place. I'm moving back in with my parents for a while. Work's a mess. But a few nights, yeah, of course." I nodded, even though I didn't know what that meant. A few nights. That was all I had. The first evening she was kind. Made me pasta. Let me borrow her robe. She even cracked a joke about Victor being a walking red flag wrapped in Armani. I forced a laugh. It felt fake. The next morning, she saw the prenatal vitamins on the counter. "You're pregnant." I nodded. She stared for a moment, then sighed. "That bastard." After that, things shifted. She started coming home late, leaving fewer blankets on the couch. She'd make offhand comments like, "Wish I had someone to pay my rent," or "Guess I should have dated a CEO instead of writing ad copy." I didn't blame her. I was an intrusion. I didn't even know who I was anymore. I tried applying for jobs, but the moment I listed my most recent experience at Langston Group, everything stopped cold. "We'll let you know. We'll be in touch." But they never were. One hiring manager was blunt. "Your name came up. Sorry, but the reputation, it's not great. Word is you lied about your qualifications. Slept your way into the job. Bit of a liability." I wanted to scream. That wasn't me. That wasn't the truth. But in the eyes of this world, Victor Langston spoke gospel, and I was just a footnote he erased. After 3 rejections in 1 week, I stopped putting on makeup. My inbox was filled with unread job alerts. I knew none of them would matter. Then came the day I broke. It started like any other gray, meaningless Tuesday. I took a city bus across town, trying to conserve what little I had left on my prepaid phone. I'd heard they still had some of my belongings at the office. Things from my desk, notebooks, a pair of flats, my grandmother's mug. I didn't want anything from that place, but I needed to take back the pieces of myself they hadn't thrown out yet. The building was sleek as ever. Marble floors, glass doors, that quiet hum of power. I nearly turned around, but something inside me, something angry, kept going. At reception, there was a new assistant. Blonde, manicured, younger. "Hi, I'm looking for... You're Olivia, right?" she interrupted. "Mr. Langston isn't in." "I'm not here for him," I said, my voice low. "I used to work here. I just came to pick up a few personal things." She looked at me like I was a cautionary tale, the girl they all whispered about in the break room. "I don't know anything about that," she said. "Let me ask someone." A minute later, Tamara from accounting appeared. She used to laugh at my jokes over stale coffee and dry donuts. Now she barely met my eyes. "Hey," she said, forcing a smile. I saved your stuff. Here." She handed me a small box, the kind they use for printer paper. It was light, pathetic. "Thanks," I whispered. That should have been it. I should have left. But just then, Victor walked in. He froze when he saw me. I saw something flicker across his face. Not guilt. Not even surprise. Just irritation. He turned and walked straight into his office, shutting the door behind him. I stood there for a beat. Then another. Then I walked after him. "Victor," I said, knocking once. "Open the door." Silence. "Victor," I yelled. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to destroy my life and hide behind your door." The new assistant gasped. Tamara backed away. I started banging. "You coward. Open it. Say it to my face." Still nothing. Security was called. Or maybe they weren't. I honestly don't know. I kept shouting, crying, screaming things I wouldn't remember later. Eventually, someone grabbed my arm. Then another. "You need to leave, miss," someone said. But I didn't stop until they dragged me out, kicking, sobbing, clutching that stupid cardboard box like it held the last of my dignity. Outside, the wind hit hard. My hair stuck to my cheeks. My knees scraped the sidewalk when I stumbled. I sat there for a minute, shaking. And then I stood up. Because what else was I supposed to do? When Katie finally asked me to leave, she didn't say it with cruelty, just quiet exhaustion. She stood by the doorway, arms crossed, eyes somewhere over my shoulder. "Liv, I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." That was all. No explanations. No fight. I just nodded and zipped up my bag. I didn't ask where she wanted me to go. She didn't offer any ideas. The door clicked behind me like a sentence being finished. I spent one night at a 24-hour diner, nursing black coffee and pretending to scroll through my phone so the waitress wouldn't ask questions. Another night curled in the back of a bus terminal, my coat wrapped around my belly, praying the security guard wouldn't notice I hadn't bought a ticket. That morning, I opened the weather app and saw the forecast. Snow, heavy wind, power outages possible. And that's when something cracked. I remembered the little house my grandfather used to take me to when I was a girl, before the cancer, before the silence that swallowed our family whole. A one-story cottage, just off a gravel road in the Flint Hills. No Wi-Fi, no working plumbing, probably, but it had 4 walls, and no one to kick me out. I took a long bus west. My entire world was stuffed into 2 trash bags and a duffel, balanced between my legs like a dam about to break. The driver didn't ask questions. Neither did the other passengers. Everyone looked away. It's funny how invisible a pregnant woman becomes when she has no ring and no return address. The last stop was a gas station. No taxis. No signal. I walked the rest of the way in boots with splitting soles and socks that felt like paper. By the time I reached the house, the sun was setting behind clouds the color of wet cement. It looked worse than I remembered. The paint peeled off like skin. Shutters hung crooked. The roof had collapsed on one corner. I stood in front of it and almost laughed. This was it. My sanctuary. The key was still in the old flower pot by the porch. I stepped inside and nearly gagged. Mold. Dust. Cold. But beneath all that it smelled like memory. Like linoleum floors and burnt soup. Like the only person who ever made me feel like I belonged. I spent the first 2 hours cleaning with paper towels and desperation. I lit 3 candles. 2 blew out. The third flickered like it was considering giving up too. There was no mattress, only an old cot folded in the corner. I laid my coat on top of it and curled sideways, hands on my stomach. "I don't have anything to give you yet," I whispered to the life inside me. "But I swear I'll figure it out." That night, the wind howled through cracks in the wood. I heard mice in the walls, rain tapping like fingers on the roof, and I slept harder than I had in weeks. The next morning, I made a plan. I scavenged what was still usable, an old kettle, a rusted camping stove, some canned food that hadn't expired. I boiled water over a fire pit in the backyard. I washed my face in the freezing runoff from the hill. I made lists in a half-burned notebook I found in the kitchen drawer. Fix the roof. Patch the windows. Find a doctor. Figure out money. There was no reception. No internet. No noise. Just me, the trees, and the sound of birds that didn't care I'd lost everything. I found the old mailbox, rusted shut. Inside it was a single yellow envelope dated 5 years ago. My name on the front. It was from my grandfather. A letter I'd never received. His handwriting looked older, shakier than I remembered. "Livy, if you're reading this, it means you finally came back. I always hoped you would. This house, it's not much, but it's yours. Do what you want with it. Tear it down, rebuild it, live in it. Just know you're never as alone as you think you are. Love you forever, Grandpa." I held the letter to my chest and sobbed until the sun broke through the clouds and spilled light across the chipped floorboards. That week, I found an old broom. I cleared out broken glass and dragged the torn curtains down. I opened every window and let the cold air scrub the bitterness from the walls. Each chore was like peeling away a version of me I didn't recognize anymore. By Friday, I started hearing my own voice again. Not the voice Victor had tried to erase. Not the one-job interviews ignored. My voice. Clear. Determined. Quietly furious. I hadn't vanished. I'd just been buried. And now, I was digging myself out. The snow came hard that night. Thick, fast, wind-blown sheets that buried the front steps by morning. I woke up to a world silenced in white. Even the trees looked stunned. Branches weighed down like bowed heads. I boiled water on the rusted stove for oatmeal, then bundled myself in every piece of fabric I could find. My coat, a flannel shirt I'd used as a curtain, even a towel draped like a scarf. The cold had teeth now, real ones. It bit at my knuckles and crept down my spine like an echo of something ancient. I was just about to seal the front door with duct tape, my latest attempt at insulation, when I heard it. Footsteps. Crisp. Measured. Coming up the gravel road that no one used anymore. I froze. No one knew I was here. Not Katie. Not Victor. Not even the landlord I never called back. For a second, my mind scrambled toward the worst possibilities. A debt collector. Someone from Victor's circle. A stranger with bad intentions. But then I saw him. A man, maybe mid-30s, wrapped in a thick Carhartt jacket and snow boots, face half covered with a scarf. He was carrying a grocery bag in one hand and a shovel in the other. He stopped at the edge of the porch, clearly surprised to see the front door cracked open and someone inside. "You must be Olivia," he said, voice calm, respectful. "I'm sorry if this is out of line. I live about a quarter-mile that way." He gestured vaguely toward the hills behind him. "Name's Daniel Walker. My dad used to keep an eye on this place before he passed. When I saw smoke from the chimney this week, well, figured someone was home again." I didn't speak. My grip on the doorknob tightened. He must have sensed it because he raised both hands slightly, still holding the bag and the shovel. "I'm not here to bother you. Just wanted to drop this off. Some food, bottled water, a few essentials. Storm's getting worse, and the power lines are already acting up. I figured. Better safe than sorry." He placed the bag gently on the porch, backed up 2 steps. "I'll be on my way," he added. "No pressure. Just welcome back, I guess." And then he turned. That was it. No lingering. No questions. No awkward small talk. Just a neighbor showing up with food and walking away into the snow. I didn't move for a long time. I stared at the brown paper bag like it might vanish if I blinked. Eventually, I stepped out, grabbed it, and brought it inside. Inside were things that felt almost like a gift from the universe. A small carton of milk, instant coffee, batteries, 2 cans of soup, a loaf of bread, and prenatal vitamins. That last item made my knees buckle. I sank to the floor, the bag between my legs, hands shaking. I hadn't told a soul out here I was pregnant, but somehow someone had seen it. A complete stranger. And instead of pity or judgment, he offered kindness. I wasn't used to kindness anymore. I sipped the warm soup that night with both hands, wrapped around the mug, like it was holy. I watched the snow pile higher against the windows and imagined this Daniel Walker out there somewhere. Maybe chopping firewood, maybe listening to the same wind tear at his windows. He hadn't asked me anything, and that was the most comforting part. 3 days later, he came back, this time with a toolbox and a bucket of nails. "Roof needs patching," he said simply, standing at the edge of the porch again, as if waiting for me to tell him to go. I didn't. I just nodded. "I can help." We worked mostly in silence. I handed him tools, held boards in place while he hammered, swept away the mess while he reinforced the loose shingles. He never pried. Not once did he ask why I was here or who I was running from, or what kind of woman ends up pregnant and alone in a half-collapsed house during a Kansas winter. Instead, he just showed up. That became our rhythm. Every few days, a knock on the door, a short conversation, a small gesture, firewood, plumbing advice, once even a coat in my size. And slowly, something inside me thawed. Not trust, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Hope, maybe. Not that everything would magically fix itself, but that not everything had to stay broken. And for the first time in a long time, I started thinking beyond survival. I started imagining a life where I could make this house whole again, where I could raise my baby surrounded by trees and sky and quiet, where kindness wasn't a currency, just something people did. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to do this alone. When the letter from my attorney arrived, I sat with it in my lap for a long time before opening it. My name, clean and printed in bold, looked foreign against the cream envelope, like it belonged to someone more put together, someone who still ironed her clothes and wore lipstick to brunch. But it was mine, and it meant the court date was set. I was going back to Topeka, back to Victor, back to everything I had worked so hard to survive. Daniel offered to drive me, but I said no. I needed to walk into that building by myself. I needed to feel every step, every tile beneath my boots, every second of that cold morning air slicing through my coat. I didn't want anyone else's strength. I wanted my own. The courtroom was as I remembered it, gray, impersonal, sterile. Victor's lawyer stood polished and smug. Flipping through papers like this was just another easy win. And Victor, he didn't even look surprised to see me, just mildly inconvenienced, like someone who'd been asked to return a package that was already out of sight and out of mind. But I looked different. I wasn't the woman he'd discarded 6 months ago, dazed and bleeding in a marble kitchen. I wasn't the girl who sobbed into her engagement dress after reading a cold, legal termination of a relationship he'd reduced to asset transfers and NDAs. I was Olivia Reed, and I had receipts, literal ones, because for the past 4 months, I hadn't just been hiding in a crumbling house in Flint Hills. I had been documenting every false claim in his financial disclosures, every forged signature in the prenup amendment he'd filed while I was in the hospital, every company expense misclassified to keep assets out of the divorce, and the big one, a transfer of $150,000 to an offshore account created 3 days before he served me with papers, in someone else's name, a name I recognized, his new girlfriend. When I handed those documents to my attorney, I saw Victor flinch for the first time. It was subtle, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. But I saw it. His lawyer scrambled, asked for a recess. Denied. I sat with my back straight and my hands folded. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Because this was the moment I had rebuilt myself for. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and zero tolerance for theatrics, took one look at the timeline and said the words I'd been waiting to hear. These discrepancies indicate an attempt to conceal marital assets. The court finds sufficient cause to freeze the defendant's accounts pending further investigation. Victor's jaw tightened. His eyes, always so confident, flicked to mine for just a second. I held his gaze, not with hatred, with finality. We didn't speak after the hearing. He stormed past me in the hallway, phone already to his ear, barking orders I no longer cared to decode. But I didn't move. I stood there in the cold marble corridor, breathing steady, my palms open, my chest light. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about making sure that child growing inside me never had to wonder if her mother had fought for her. And I had, with everything I had left. Later that week, the bank confirmed the account freeze. My portion of the marital estate, what Victor had tried to cheat me out of, would be returned. Not all at once, not easily, but it was coming, and with it came something more valuable. Closure. I didn't want his money. I wanted the truth to be seen, and for once it had been. I returned to Flint Hills under a gray sky and light snow. Daniel met me halfway down the drive, shovel in hand, eyes searching mine without asking a thing. "I take it you won," he said, smiling just enough to crinkle the edges of his eyes. "I did," I said softly, "but it doesn't feel like a win." He nodded, then gestured toward the porch. "That's okay. Sometimes it just needs to feel like a clean slate." I looked at the house behind him. It still needed work. New windows, a better roof, fresh paint. But for the first time since I arrived, it felt like mine, like something I could build on, not just hide in. And I realized then, winning doesn't always look like standing over someone who wronged you. Sometimes it looks like walking away, without needing to look back. The baby came on a Sunday morning, just as the frost began to settle across the fields like powdered sugar. I had spent the night tossing and turning, not out of pain, but anticipation, the quiet kind that settles into your bones when something is about to change forever. Her cry was sharp, immediate, demanding. She entered the world not with a whimper, but a roar, just like her mother had in a different way. I held her against my chest, skin to skin, and I whispered her name into the soft curls at the crown of her head. I had chosen it months ago, in the silence of a crumbling farmhouse, with only the crackle of the stove for company. Her name was Hope, not because I needed to be poetic, but because that's what she was even before she existed. Dr. Hayes smiled gently as he handed me the paperwork. "She's healthy. You're both going to be just fine, Olivia." Those words, "you're going to be fine," landed differently now. They weren't empty encouragements. They were the truth. I had proof in my arms, all 5 pounds of it, eyes like mine, a tiny frown that reminded me of Grandpa Reed. Cassidy brought flowers. Daniel brought fresh-baked cinnamon rolls and pretended he didn't notice the tears I tried to hide when he asked if I'd picked out a middle name yet. "I was thinking," I said slowly, "maybe her middle name should be Eleanor." He blinked, surprised. "Your mother-in-law?" "No," I said softly, then looked out the window, where the snow had begun to fall in slow, peaceful flakes. The woman who raised my child's father might have failed me, but she did one thing right. She taught me exactly who not to become. Daniel didn't press further. He simply sat beside me, our shoulders touching, as we watched the snow coat the world outside in white. I didn't return to Topeka. I had no reason to. Victor, and I never spoke again. His assets were divided, his reputation damaged, just enough to slow him down, but not destroy him. I didn't need him destroyed. I just needed him irrelevant. And he was. Instead, I stayed in Flint Hills. I planted a garden. I sanded down the porch swing. I painted the nursery in warm tones and strung up little white stars across the ceiling. Every nail I hammered, every book I stacked on the shelf, every lullaby I hummed to myself while folding tiny onesies, it all stitched me back together in ways I didn't think were possible. A few weeks after Hope was born, I woke up before sunrise and walked outside in my slippers, baby monitor in hand. The air bit at my skin, but I didn't care. I stood at the edge of the porch, breath rising in clouds, and looked across the hills. Everything was still, quiet, sacred. That's when I noticed it. On the railing of the porch, written in delicate frost, was her name. Hope. I hadn't done it. Neither had Daniel or Cassidy or anyone I knew. It was just there, like the universe was saying, "Yes, this is right. This is yours." I'm not saying life became perfect. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, days the roof still leaked, weeks I questioned if I was strong enough to raise a child alone. But I was never truly alone again. Hope's tiny fingers wrapped around mine every morning. Her laughter filled the cracks in my spirit. Her presence made my pain feel like a distant echo. I used to think the worst thing in the world was being broken. But it turns out the worst thing is believing you'll never be whole again. Because you will. Maybe not in the way you expected. Maybe not with the people you started with. But in time, and in truth, you'll rebuild. I did. And every time I look at her, at Hope, I'm reminded, some stories don't end with revenge. They begin with it, and then they become something softer, something braver, something like love. I only stopped by the apartment because I forgot my flash drive. I had no intention of staying more than 5 minutes, but the moment I turned the key and stepped inside, something felt off. It was quiet, too quiet, and then I heard his voice coming from the bedroom. At first, I thought he was on a work call, but then I heard her voice, a woman's voice, soft, familiar, and far too intimate for someone he'd call a colleague. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. But back then, just hours earlier, I was still the woman who would have fought anyone who dared to question my husband's loyalty. That morning had started like so many others. The sun was pouring through our kitchen window, catching on the floating specks of dust in the air. Our apartment in Chicago was small but warm, filled with quiet little details we'd picked together over 3 years of marriage. I was rushing, of course, stirring my coffee with one hand, shuffling through my work bag with the other. My final presentation was in less than 2 hours, and if I nailed it, I was going to be promoted to director of PR for my firm. "Ryan," I called out as I slipped into my blazer, "have you seen my flash drive? The blue one." He appeared in the doorway with his usual effortless charm, tall, clean-shaven, still towel-drying his hair from his morning shower. "I think you left it on the side table last night," he said, crossing the room to kiss my cheek. "You nervous?" "Of course," I said, offering a tight smile. "If I can't convince the board today, someone else will take the job." "You'll crush it," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "Besides, once my deal with the French clients goes through, we'll finally be able to take that ski trip you keep dreaming about. The Alps. Remember?" I smiled again, but something inside me tensed. Ryan had a way of always bringing things back to himself. My promotion had somehow turned into a footnote to his vacation plans. The phone rang just then. I almost didn't answer. My hands were full and I was already late. But when I saw the name flash on the screen, Janet Thompson, I paused. Ryan's mother's neighbor. She never called me directly. "Hi, Janet," I said, glancing at Ryan, who looked up, surprised. "Claire," she said gently, "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but your mother-in-law, Margaret, she's had a stroke. The ambulance just took her to Ashwood General Hospital. She's stable but critical." The world around me tilted slightly. I handed Ryan the phone wordlessly. His face shifted from confusion to alarm to something I couldn't quite name. Panic? Or guilt? "I have to go," he said after the call. "But my investors are flying in this afternoon. I can't cancel on them, Claire. Not now." I stared at him. His mother was in the hospital, and he was thinking about investors. "I'll go," I said quietly. "She needs someone with her. I'll call Emily and have her take over my presentation." Ryan exhaled with visible relief. "Too quickly. Are you sure? This could cost you the promotion." I nodded, though my throat tightened. "Family comes first, right?" He wrapped his arms around me, burying his face in my hair. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. I left that afternoon on the 2:40 train to Ashwood, suitcase in hand and a gnawing feeling in my chest that I couldn't quite explain. At the time, I thought it was just worry for Margaret. I had no idea I was walking into the first step of unraveling my entire marriage. Ashwood was colder than I remembered. The kind of small town where everything feels like it's been paused in time. Rows of modest houses, cracked sidewalks, a pharmacy that still handwrites its signs. The cab driver dropped me off outside Margaret's duplex just before sunset. Janet was already waiting at the gate, holding a pale green umbrella and a worried expression. "You must be Claire," she said, offering a firm but kind handshake. "We spoke on the phone." I nodded. "Thank you for everything. I wasn't expecting this." "None of us were," she replied softly. "Margaret's at Ashwood General. I'll take you in the morning. You should rest tonight." Inside the house, everything smelled like lavender and old books. Margaret had always kept her place pristine. A widow for over a decade, she turned her home into a little shrine of order lace curtains, tea sets, framed photos of Ryan at every age. None of me, just him. Janet helped me settle in and left me with a thermos of herbal tea and a blanket. I stood alone in the guest room, watching the rain tap against the window. It was strange, being in this house without Ryan, caring for a woman who'd never truly accepted me, in a town that had always felt like it belonged to someone else's past. The next morning, the hospital's corridors smelled like antiseptic and resignation. Machines beeped faintly behind closed curtains. Margaret was in a private room at the end of the hall. She looked small, pale, tubes running from her arms, her left side nearly motionless. When I entered, she turned her head slightly and smiled. "You came?" she whispered, the words thick and slow. I forced a smile, stepping closer. "Of course." Ryan had to stay back. "Work. But I'll be here, as long as you need." Her eyes welled with tears. Whether from gratitude or exhaustion, I didn't know. Over the next 2 weeks, my days fell into a numbing rhythm. Early mornings at the hospital, rehab meetings, errands, cooking simple meals, folding laundry. Margaret slowly regained her speech, though the left side of her body remained weak. The doctors said recovery would take months, maybe longer. Every night, Ryan called. He asked about his mother, never about me. He told me how the French deal was progressing, how the client was demanding, how proud he was of himself. He never once asked if I was sleeping, eating, coping. I told myself it didn't matter. "You're a good woman," Janet said one evening as we folded towels together. "Too good, maybe. Ryan's lucky." I offered a polite laugh, but something twisted inside me. Lucky? Ryan hadn't even shown up. "He's busy," I said quietly. "Important project." Janet's face softened with a look I couldn't read. Part pity, part something else. "That boy's been getting away with everything since he was in diapers. Margaret never said no to him. Gave him everything. The rest of us watched and shook our heads. But she always believed he was destined for more." I didn't reply. I couldn't. Later that night, I sat on the edge of the guest bed, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. I wasn't looking for anything, just distraction. A break from the loop of hospital smells and polite nods and Ryan's endless voicemails. That's when I saw it. A photo posted by an old college friend, tagged at a trendy restaurant in downtown Chicago. The kind of place Ryan always said was too loud for him. But in the background, behind a sleek glass of red wine, was him, Ryan, laughing, leaning in close to a young woman with long blonde hair, her hand on his arm, their heads nearly touching. My breath caught. My fingers froze. No, it couldn't be, but it was. I stared at the photo, willing it to be a mistake. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was just someone who looked like Ryan. Same build, same jawline, same annoyingly perfect posture. But the more I looked, the more my stomach tightened. His watch, the dimple in his left cheek, the cufflinks I gave him for our anniversary. It was him, no question. The woman next to him was young, maybe mid-20s. She leaned into him the way someone leans into someone familiar. Intimate, comfortable, not business. I zoomed in. Her fingers rested lightly on his forearm. Her nails painted a soft blush pink. His mouth was half open, like he was whispering something in her ear. She laughed. Her head tilted just slightly, and I felt a sharp stab of something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even rage. It was worse. It was confirmation. He wasn't here because of work. He hadn't come because he didn't want to. I didn't sleep that night. I told Janet I was going back to Chicago for a day to grab some things. She didn't ask questions, just nodded and offered to bring Margaret some soup while I was gone. By the time I stepped off the train the next morning, I had a plan. Or at least I thought I did. I'd come home, quietly. I'd see him, ask some questions, give him a chance to tell the truth. Maybe in some twisted part of me I wanted to be wrong. The apartment was spotless. Too spotless. The kind of clean that smells like citrus wipes in panic. On the coffee table was a vase of fresh lilies. I hadn't bought flowers in weeks. There were throw pillows on the couch I didn't recognize, bright geometric patterns that clashed with everything else, and 2 mugs in the sink, one with a lipstick stain, pale pink. I felt the calm wash over me, not real calm, but that numb, focused quiet that comes right before a storm. I set my bag down, walked into the kitchen, and spotted 2 plates drying in the rack. Both used, both recent. He was home. I could hear the shower running. I sat at the table and waited. When Ryan came out 10 minutes later, his hair was damp, his face clean-shaven. He wore sweatpants and a fitted t-shirt like it was any other Saturday. When he saw me, he flinched. "Claire," he said, caught mid-step. "I didn't expect you until this afternoon." "I took the early train," I said evenly. "Margaret needed some things. I thought I'd pick them up." He nodded slowly, watching me like a man trying to calculate how much I knew. "I grabbed some medicine for your cold," I added, gesturing to the bag I'd placed on the counter. "Though it doesn't look like you're that sick." He offered a weak smile. Must have been a 24-hour bug. I moved into the kitchen, noting the 2 mugs again. "Did you have someone over?" Ryan hesitated. "A colleague. We're working on the pitch for the French clients. She dropped off some notes." I turned slowly. "She wears lipstick." He blinked. "I guess. Didn't notice." "Her name?" "Samantha. From marketing." There it was. The lie delivered too fast. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked past him, straight into the bedroom. The bed was made, but on the nightstand, a bottle of unfamiliar perfume and a gold hair clip, glittering with fake stones. Tacky. Young. Not mine. I opened the closet. A few new blouses. A dress I didn't recognize. And in the drawer, lace underwear that definitely wasn't mine. That's when I heard it. Voices from the hallway. Ryan. And her. "I told you not to come today," he hissed. "She's home." "I forgot something," she replied, her voice sharp. How was I supposed to know she'd show up unannounced? "You said she'd be back in the afternoon." "Well, clearly she's not." There was a pause. Then she added, "I'm tired of this, Ryan. Of sneaking around. I'm pregnant." Everything inside me stopped. I stood frozen in the hallway, pressed against the wall as if somehow that would make me invisible. My ears rang. Her words kept echoing. "I'm pregnant." Ryan didn't respond immediately. I could hear him shifting, his voice low and tense. "Christina," he hissed, "not now." "You think I'm just going to disappear until it's convenient for you?" she snapped back. "You told me she'd be out of town for weeks. You said you were going to tell her." "I will," he muttered. "I just need time." My hands were shaking. I backed away from the door, trying to breathe. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the betrayal or the way he talked about me, like I was an obstacle, a scheduling issue. I returned to the kitchen, sat down, and waited. I didn't want to hide anymore. I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to know I heard everything. The front door opened moments later. Ryan stepped in, closing it carefully behind him. He looked like a man walking into a courtroom, not a home. "She's gone," he said softly, not meeting my eyes. "I know," I said. He froze. "I heard everything, Ryan. The hallway isn't soundproof." His face tightened. He sat across from me, eyes flickering with calculation. "Claire, I was going to tell you. Don't." I cut him off. "Don't lie. Don't insult me any more than you already have." He swallowed hard. "It's complicated." "No, it's really not," I said. "You cheated on me. You brought her here, into our home, into our bed, and now she's pregnant." He looked down, his hands clasped. "You don't understand. I've been under pressure. With Mom, with work, you left. I was alone." I blinked. I left to take care of your dying mother. He flinched. I gave up the most important presentation of my career to be there for her. For you. And you. You were here playing house with someone barely out of college. I didn't plan for this to happen, he said quickly. It just did. I stared at him. Did she know you were married? She knew, he said, but she thought things were ending between us. Were they? I asked, my voice calm now. Were you planning to end things, Ryan? Or were you just hoping I'd keep playing nurse while you sorted out your little double life? He looked cornered, angry. It's not that simple. It is. We were interrupted by his phone vibrating on the table. He looked at the screen and frowned. It's the hospital, he said quietly. It's about Mom. I didn't move. Neither did he. For a moment, we were just two strangers sitting across from each other, the weight of everything unspoken pressing down on the room. He answered the call, and his expression changed instantly. What? When? A pause. Yes, of course. I'll be there. He hung up, pale. It's Mom. She's had a second stroke. They say it's worse this time. I stood numb. Then we should go. I'll drive, he said, already grabbing his keys. But as we stepped into the elevator, he turned to me and said, I don't need you turning this into a scene, Claire. Not now. I looked at him and saw, for the first time, exactly who he was, not a husband in crisis, but a man scrambling to protect an image he thought he still had control over. I'm not the one who created a scene, I said. I just finally stepped into it. We didn't speak again for the rest of the ride. Ashwood smelled like rain when we arrived, the kind that settles into the pavement and lingers in your clothes. Ryan didn't speak during the drive. His fingers clenched the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road like he could outrun what was waiting on the other end. We reached the hospital just after midnight. The lobby was dim, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Janet was in the waiting area, her hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of vending machine coffee. She's stable, she said softly, standing up. But they say the second stroke was worse. Ryan asked a few questions, but it was clear Janet was speaking mostly to me. She's conscious, barely. They're keeping her under observation, but she asked for you, Claire. For me? I said, startled. Janet nodded. She said, Tell Claire I need to see her first. Ryan looked offended. She's my mother. Janet raised an eyebrow. And yet she asked for your wife. A nurse led me down the corridor, past a row of identical doors, until we reached the end of the hall. The room was quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of machines and the gentle hiss of oxygen. Margaret lay still, her skin pale, eyes half-lidded. But when she saw me, something shifted in her expression, relief and shame. I walked in slowly, sitting by her side. Her hand twitched, and I reached out to hold it. She looked at me, eyes swimming with emotion. You saw him, she whispered, her voice hoarse and uneven. I nodded. You know. I do. Tears welled in her eyes. She blinked hard, trying to hold them back. I'm sorry, she rasped. I should have stopped it. Years ago, I let him become this. You couldn't have known, I said softly. I did, she whispered. After his father died, I gave him everything. No boundaries, no consequences. I wanted to protect him, but all I did was raise a man who thought the world owed him everything. She squeezed my hand weakly. Don't let him take you down with him. I swallowed the lump in my throat. What about you? What do you want me to do? She looked away, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. Then, slowly, she turned back. The apartment, the one in Chicago. It's yours now. I had the papers drawn up last month, before the first stroke. I just never told him. I stared at her, stunned. I watched you give up everything, she continued, her voice barely a whisper. Your job, your future, for me. Not for him. For me. And he didn't even bother to show up. I shook my head. Margaret, I didn't do it for a reward. I know, she said. That's why you deserve it. I felt tears finally break free, sliding down my cheeks. Are you sure? She closed her eyes, breathing shallow. I've never been more sure of anything. Just then, the door creaked open. Ryan stepped in, his face pale, eyes darting between us. They said I could come in. Margaret turned her face away from him. 5 minutes, she told the nurse without looking at him. For him, but only after Claire leaves. I stood, brushing his shoulder as I passed. He looked at me, eyes filled with confusion and something like fear. What did she say to you? He demanded. I didn't answer, because some truths don't need to be spoken out loud. They're felt, like weight lifting off your chest, like a door finally closing behind you. The courtroom felt colder than it should have. Or maybe it was just me, sitting beside my lawyer, back straight, palms damp, pretending I wasn't trembling beneath the surface. Across the aisle, Ryan sat with his attorney, looking polished, calculated. He didn't look at me. Not once. I was being sued by my own husband for emotional damage, for manipulating his mother in a time of weakness. He wanted the Chicago apartment back. He claimed Margaret hadn't been of sound mind when she signed the transfer of ownership. The irony was suffocating. Margaret wasn't there. She was still recovering in Ashwood, and even if she had been strong enough to attend, I doubted she would have sat quietly in the gallery while her son twisted reality into knots. The judge, a woman in her 50s with a sharp jawline and eyes like steel, asked for opening statements. Ryan's lawyer painted me as a schemer, said I'd swooped in during a medical crisis and turned a vulnerable old woman against her son, that I took advantage of grief and medication to gain property and power. I didn't flinch, but inside I burned. My attorney responded with calm precision. Your Honor, he said, we have notarized documents, video recordings, and multiple witnesses, both medical and personal, attesting to Margaret Morgan's full cognitive capacity at the time of the transfer. She was not confused. She was not pressured. She was disappointed. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Morgan, she said, can you tell the court in your own words why Margaret decided to transfer the apartment to you? I took a breath, a long one. Because she saw what I didn't want to see, I said softly, that I was sacrificing myself for someone who never truly valued me. While I was at her bedside, feeding her, changing her clothes, learning how to help her walk again, her son was living with another woman in our apartment. That woman is now pregnant. Margaret didn't give me the apartment out of pity. She gave it to me because, for once in her life, she wanted to do the right thing. There was a murmur in the courtroom. I kept my gaze steady. Ryan's attorney objected. This is hearsay. But the judge raised a hand. It speaks to motive. Overruled. Just then, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. I turned and my heart stopped. It was Margaret, in a wheelchair, pushed by Janet, her posture frail but upright, her expression unwavering. Ryan stood up. Mom, what are you doing here? She ignored him. The judge allowed her to speak under oath, and when she reached the front, the room fell silent. I was not coerced, she said, her voice rough but clear. My mind was intact when I gave Claire that apartment, and I stand by it. My son has been lying. To you, to me, to himself. Claire gave up everything to care for me when he wouldn't lift a finger. She was my daughter when he stopped being my son. Ryan looked like he'd been slapped. How could you say that? He spat. After everything I've done for you? What you've done, Margaret replied coldly, is break every ounce of trust one had left. The judge leaned forward. Thank you, Mrs. Morgan. That will be all. It was over in less than 10 minutes after that. The apartment stayed in my name. The counterclaim was dismissed with prejudice. Ryan's face twisted, and for the first time in years, I saw him without his mask. He wasn't angry. He was exposed. He followed me out into the corridor. You planned all this, he hissed. You turned my own mother against me. I looked him dead in the eye. "No, Ryan. You did that all by yourself." And I walked away, free. I didn't know how to start over. I just knew I had to. The apartment, the one Margaret gave me, felt too heavy with memories. Every corner still echoed with versions of myself I didn't want to revisit. So I packed a small suitcase, left the keys on the counter, and moved into a short-term rental near the lake. That's where Michael found me again. We'd only exchanged a few words before. He was the neighbor who'd helped me with my suitcase the day I left Ryan. Back then, he offered quiet kindness, the kind that didn't ask questions. But now, his name showed up in my inbox. Michael Carter, Crescent Media Group. He'd seen my resume online, said there was a new opening in PR at his company, and asked if I'd like to come in for an interview. At first, I thought it was pity. Then I realized it wasn't. It was respect. "Your work for Technostar was solid," he said during the interview. "We need someone who knows how to build trust back into a broken brand." Trust. That word hung in the air between us. I got the job. Michael never brought up my past. Not once. But over time, I found myself telling him anyway. Not because I needed to explain myself, but because I wanted someone to know me beyond the damage. He listened, really listened, and he never flinched. He had his own scars too. A widower. His daughter, Sophie, was 6. Bright, curious, always asking questions I didn't know how to answer. "Are you sad?" she asked me one day while we were having ice cream in the park. I hesitated. "Sometimes. But I'm getting better." She nodded thoughtfully. "My dad gets sad too. But when he cooks spaghetti, he smiles again. Maybe spaghetti is the cure." Maybe it was. Or maybe it was the way she leaned against him at bedtime, or the way he looked at her like she was the one holding his world together. Over time, dinners turned into weekends. Weekends into school runs. I found myself at their kitchen table helping with homework, watching movies on rainy nights, learning to breathe again. And Michael never pushed. He didn't need grand gestures. Just a cup of coffee waiting for me in the morning, a steady hand when I needed to cry, a laugh shared over something small and silly. One night, months after the court ruling, we stood on the balcony of his apartment watching the city lights shimmer across the lake. Sophie had fallen asleep with her favorite storybook still clutched in her hands. "I never thought I'd have this again," I whispered. Michael turned to me, his voice quiet. "Neither did I." There was a pause, then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "It's not an engagement ring," he said quickly, almost shy. "Just a promise that if you ever want a new beginning, I'll be there." Inside was a delicate silver ring with a tiny sapphire set in the center. Simple, honest. It didn't sparkle like the one Ryan gave me years ago, but it felt real, unshakable. I didn't cry. I smiled. And for the first time in what felt like forever, it wasn't forced. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's build something new." I thought I was done with Ryan. I had my own place now, a job I loved, people who made my life feel warm and solid again. Margaret was recovering steadily in Ashwood. Sophie was teaching me how to braid hair and draw unicorns. Michael, steady, kind Michael, was the first man I didn't feel the need to hide my fears from. But Ryan wasn't finished with me. It started with emails, then texts. "We need to talk. You ruined everything. I want what's mine back." I ignored them. For weeks. Then one afternoon, as I was leaving work, I saw him standing outside the building. Same suit, same forced smile, but something in his eyes had changed. Something colder, more desperate. "You work for Carter now," he spat, stepping in front of me. "Seriously? You think that's not a slap in the face?" I didn't flinch. "I don't owe you anything, Ryan. Not a conversation. Not an explanation." "You turned my mother against me," he hissed. "You took everything." "No," I said calmly. "You lost everything. All I did was stop protecting you from yourself." He grabbed my arm. Hard. Before I could say a word, a voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Let her go." "Michael." He stepped forward, his presence quiet but firm. Ryan hesitated, then let go, backing away like a cornered animal. "You think you've won," he growled. "She's damaged. She'll never be enough." Michael didn't respond. He didn't have to. His hand found mine, and without another word, we walked away together. That night, I sat on the couch with Sophie curled against me, telling me about her day. She didn't ask about the man at my office. She just said, "You seem a little quieter than usual. Want some of my cookie?" I kissed the top of her head. "Yeah, I think I do." Weeks passed, then months. Ryan eventually stopped calling. Margaret sent a letter. Handwritten, shaky but powerful. "Thank you for letting me see the truth. You were never the problem, Claire. You were the mirror." It was the most painful compliment I'd ever received. Spring arrived. Sophie picked flowers in the park and tied them into little bunches, leaving them on my desk at home. Michael cooked dinner most nights. I helped with science projects. We laughed a lot, not because life was perfect, but because it was real. And one morning, as sunlight poured through the windows and the smell of coffee filled the kitchen, I realized something. I wasn't healing anymore. I was whole. I wore the sapphire ring on my right hand, not as a possession, but as a promise to myself, that I would never again make myself small for someone else's comfort. That love wasn't supposed to feel like walking on broken glass barefoot. Claire Morgan, the woman who once gave everything to a man who gave nothing, was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone stronger. And as I stood by the window, watching Sophie and Michael laughing in the backyard, I didn't feel the need to look back, because the future was already here.